better believe
I'm sure about to follow you to the car.
Hey, you heard what he just said. Don't nobody mess with him.
Don't nobody mess with
that
me,
man
bro.
walked straight down the street. Captain America walked down the street.
Watched him walk down the street. I was like, there's no way this man walking down the street.
These are just men together having a good time. And I think that it's these types of settings that, at least in a secular sense, masculinity begins to get its name back. All right, welcome back to the Black and Blurred podcast. Hey, now, I'm grateful for you to be here. Could you do me a favor and like and subscribe if you haven't already? Comment on this video if you like what you hear. If you don't like what you hear, do me a favor. Tell me in the comment section how much you don't like it, and then double click that like button. Anthony Mackie is on the Pivot podcast. I actually don't watch the Pivot podcast very often. I've seen clips from it that I think are actually very good. I don't know. I need to be cooler, I guess. I don't know. But Captain America joins the Pivot podcast, and he ends up discussing something that is quite important. Let's go here. And he's addressing a topic that needs to be addressed. I think is being addressed in the secular space. I think it's being addressed in a poisonous way in a secular space, yet it's also being neglected in the church. And I think the reason the church ought to be leading in this discussion is because we serve the maker of men. We serve the one who made men. So the church needs to be leading this discussion, but I think that we can learn a lot listening to what Anthony Mackie has to say here. And then I have some loving challenges for him, actually, and others who are thinking like him. I just got some questions, and I got some things I want to work through with you guys. So join me, and let's listen to this really quickly.
But with Captain America is interesting because I try to keep my boys outside of it. Like, I don't want my boys affected by it or even acknowledge the idea of what Hollywood is and what it means to the general populace. Because I want them to find their own path. And we're blessed. Like, we're put in a position where we can afford our kids the best. Mm-hmm. You know, we're in a position where our grandkids, our great-grandkids will be provided for. You know, we weren't like that.
Right.
You know, I know on the West Bank you wasn't like that.
No doubt.
Yeah, y'all ate, Vienna sausages and poke and beans, you know?
I did, though.
That's what I'm saying. But
Straight
that's
up.
real.
Yeah.
That's where we came from. I keep my boys humble. Like, my boys have never had a pair of Jordans. My boys don't do all that internet fly. I'm like your kids. And no, I don't give a f. I could be the biggest star in the world. Do not let me catch you being stupid. Mm-hmm. Do not.
Right now, he's talking about some basics of fatherhood. That one of the benefits of having a father in the house is that the child doesn't end up having to be a father replacement. What do I mean by that? Now, don't jump on me here, but growing up in Baltimore, having seen a lot of single parent households, and especially single parent households that have been cyclical, where it's like there's fatherlessness. You have women who get pregnant, and the man doesn't stay to his fault. He's not a man and he doesn't stay. Or he's not present to take care of the son. And so the son, I'm talking about just raising boys here, the son ends up having to be a replacement for him. The woman wants a companion, and that companion ends up being her son. So much so to the point, I'm going to be drastic here, but I've seen it, but I'm just going to be general. So much so to the point that they end up dressing him like a little man. Maybe it's subconscious. I'm not trying to psychologize anybody, but the kids aren't allowed to be kids because they have to fill the role of a companion. And you see that in a lot of single mother households. And I think one of the beautiful aspects of what Anthony Mackie is addressing here is he's allowing his children to maintain their innocence and not grow up so soon. He's protecting them from having their innocence taken from them. That's necessary. That's very necessary. Let's keep going.
And my oldest gets it. My 15-year-old, he tells the other ones, he's like, yo, don't make dad mad. Because once you get one that's right, he's going to straighten the other ones out. Mm-hmm. So it's just that thing of, in the past 20 years, we've we've been living through the death of the American male. They have literally killed masculinity in our homes and our communities for one reason or another. But
I'm sorry. I'm going to let him cook. However, you think about a podcast like this, like the Pivot podcast. He says that we've let them kill masculinity for one reason or another. I'll say the main reason is money, right? Something that probably nobody's thinking about right now is that on this podcast, the bigger you get, the more censored you have to be. So even with a podcast filled with men, you can't talk about men things because they will naturally collide with what the powers that be want the world to think and want our country to think. That masculinity, male headship, all those types of things, when you start talking about real masculinity and male headship, it will collide on the decay in the family. And when the decay in the family starts decaying, when you start having healthy families, you no longer have a need for government dependence. And when you no longer have a need for government dependence, you won't have government indoctrination. When you don't have government indoctrination, you don't have a bunch of different academia or academic institutions telling you you're no longer a boy or no longer a girl. Like, you see the cycle. These things will end up correcting themselves with nature. Naturally will end up correcting themselves. I haven't even instituted a biblical perspective that actually promotes flourishing. We're just talking about nature because today in our society, we're going against the natural order. That's why you saw a lot of just like conservatives buddying up with Christians. You're starting to see the sifting of these things now. You're starting to see the distinction between a conservative who's just a conservative and a Christian, because now it seems like things are getting back on track in the natural order. But things were so far gone in the natural order that everybody was looking for some semblance of truth. And what Anthony Mackie is addressing here is it's very important. Let me just shut up. Let me shut up and let you watch.
I raised my boys to be young men. And however you feel about that, you feel about that. Right. But my boys will always be respectful. They will always say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. No, sir, no, ma'am. They will always say thank you. They will always open a door for a lady. They will always make sure that their mother is taken care and provided for. They will always be men. And that's always since they were 2 years old. Every time I left for a job, I tell my 15-year-old, you're the man of the house. You make sure these doors are locked every night, this alarm is on, you text me or you call me every night before you go to bed and you wake up.
Now, the Pivot podcast, this is not me railing on them. I don't know them personally, but I just know that podcast exists in the same space where Dwayne Wade is turning his son into a girl. I think that's why you're not going to see a lot of these types of topics. You got Anthony Mackie, who's bringing that topic on their podcast. I'm grateful, but he's talking about in one way or another, masculinity has been killed. It's because we've been allowing it to be killed. Men are protectors. Inherently, men are shepherds of society. And in order for society to be overrun by wolves, then good men have to lay down. The Pivot podcast exists in a space where Dwayne Wade can turn his son into a girl and be celebrated for it. I think we have to address that, right?
Because we're men. If I'm not there to protect, he got to be there to protect. Because you can have all the money in the world, motherfucker climb through the window, that money means nothing. Right. You can have all the celebrity in the world, motherfucker jump through the door, that celebrity means nothing. Yeah. So you got to have a little guard in there, you know? And so for me, it's always that idea of American masculinity is very different. You feel it when you go to Europe. Like you see these and you're like, could bust your ass, boy. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You go to Europe.
Tight ass pants.
Yeah, tight ass pants. Motherfucker, good, boy, you better lotion your ankle. Like, you feel it when you go to Europe. Even when you, like, I was just in Kenya and I was walking around, I'm like, yeah. Dude was like, you ain't from here. Like, nah. Like, yeah, I could tell. I know you can. I could tell I ain't from here. You know what I mean? It's
They're
just that.
Shooting it up now. Just having a good conversation. I think he's addressed a lot of great things in that. The masculinity aspect. Masculinity has died. You know, speaking as a Christian, coming from a Christian context, I've seen it. I've seen the death of masculinity. I've seen the fruits of that death. I've seen the death inside of men who recognize that death, where they sit in congregations and in services and communities where they are men and they realize that just out of nature, they don't really get to celebrate their manhood because we have been told that that's bad, and they're surrounded by people who will remind them that it's bad. And it's like, what do you do? Well, I'll tell you what you do. You end up playing video games pretending to be men. You go to war, you drive cars, you build careers and things like that, and you end up playing these games where you pretend to be men. That's what ends up happening. Meanwhile, the church is meant to be a discipleship factory. And here we are failing it. We're failing men. I want to pull up an article real quick, or yeah, it's an article. Look at this. I want to show you something. There was a scholar that posted about the church and failing men, how it's failing men. And he said that in his findings, well, not in his findings, he actually texted AI. But he texted AI, he asked AI, what did he say? Hold on, let me try to find what it was he said. He said, I asked AI why churches are resistant to addressing the boy crisis head on. And this is what it said. And he asked, is this true? And the first thing that came up, AI said, gender ideology and political sensitivities. Discussions around boys' struggles can be perceived as challenging feminist narratives that have long focused on advocating for women's rights. Some may fear that acknowledging boys' struggles detracts from addressing gender inequality for women. Now, let me highlight this really quickly. One of the reasons our society has been caught in a snare across the board regarding a lot of things is because we've allowed the wounded to lead the discussion, right? When it comes down to ethnicity, when it comes down to fatherlessness, when it comes down to marriage, when it comes down to womanhood, we've allowed wounded individuals to lead discussions. So Anthony Mackie said that he makes his sons hold the door for women. There are women out there that don't like that. And you know why? Because they have wounds. Why wouldn't you want to be honored? It's because you're acting from a wounded place. And over time, those wounds turn to just straight up bitterness, resentment, and anger and hatred. That's outside of a gender context. This transcends a specific context. You see that in the ethnic conversation too. We're allowing the wounded to lead the discussion. Let's go back. Another reason, cultural shifts away from masculinity. Western culture has become increasingly skeptical of traditional masculinity, sometimes equating male struggles with male privilege. Because of this, many assume that boys and men do not need support, even when data shows otherwise. This is AI giving us these answers. Educational and institutional neglect. Schools and policy institutions have been slow to adapt to the growing crisis among boys, partly because educational frameworks are still largely focused on closing the historical gender gap in favor of girls. Meanwhile, this is Brandon speaking now. When you look at education, when you look at college campuses, when you look at even churches, girls disproportionately outnumber men. Women disproportionately outnumber men in those categories that can, and in some way, produce flourishing. Going back to the quote, AI's quote, with limited resources, attention is often directed toward previously marginalized groups, leaving boys' issues under-addressed. I'm going to take a stab here really quickly. I'm going to end there. But I'm going to take a stab here. That trend that you're seeing AI address when it comes down to the gender war, we're going to start seeing that also in the ethnic war. Because of the direction of the conversations of race, Lord forbid, but in 50 years, I wonder what being a white American is going to mean. There are some people who applaud it and say, yeah, let them suffer. But those are the people leading the discussion today. And that's why we're going to see a deficit. We've seen hurt, embittered, and resentful people lead the discussion on gender. And we have seen cowards who don't want to lead and stand firm for the sake of all peoples, men and women. We've seen them cower out and lay down and allow wolves to take over in society. That's why you have men beating up on women in combat sports or just competing against women in different sports. You've had cowards. And Anthony Mackie, I think, addressed something important. There's a whole lot more to say. Oh, I did say that I was going to ask a couple questions. One thing I'm going to ask is this. Anthony Mackie is a product of Hollywood, and Hollywood is if not the biggest microphone of the destruction of masculinity. So, how do you reconcile that? Of course, you have to keep your sons outside of Hollywood, because if Hollywood gets to your sons, they want to chop some things off. I'm sorry for my crass language, but that's the way it is now. And if they don't want to do it physically, they want to do it figuratively. Anthony Mackie has been in some non-masculine roles, if you get what I'm saying. He's had some non-masculine roles.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
How does he feel about that? Let me know. Let me know, guys. Like and subscribe. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts. Tell me in the comment section. What did I miss? But I think that if you're a product for Hollywood, I don't know how much of a voice you can have to fight for masculinity. I'll see y'all later.